Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC TV, here with part 3 of our look beneath the veneer of so-called gun control. You know, in parts 1 and 2, we had the opportunity to look at the rhetoric of the so-called gun control backers, the statistics that don't really back the backers, and we had the chance to read the wording of the Founding Fathers and find out what they really meant when they wrote the Second Amendment. Now, to wrap things up, I'd like to offer you some logical arguments that seem to show that those people who say they want less gun violence on the streets by passing gun control laws are actually engaging in threats of gun violence. And I'd like to conclude by looking at where we stand today regarding our rights, the Constitution, and the courts. Hi everyone. To close things off in this part 3 of our look beneath the veneer of so-called gun control, I'd like to offer you some information that you might be able to take with you, adjust, or just use straight out. Let's say you run into a person who supports so-called gun control laws because they want less gun violence and threats on the streets. Okay, well, why not pose them a series of questions? Almost like you're in an Aristotelian conversation, a syllogism, you might say. The first question would be, is possession of something a violent act? And of course the answer is no, it's not a violent act. It doesn't harm anyone else to possess something. That's fairly clear. The next question is, okay, does possession connote intent? What do we mean by that? Well, of course, we're all separate individuals. So even though we might try to take a guess or an educated guess as to why someone bought something or made something or got something from someone else through trade, we can't say for another person why he or she bought that thing or possesses that thing. It's not our place, okay? We can see that. Someone might have a pair of scissors, but we don't know whether they're going to use them for a theater prop or put them next to their bed for defensive purposes or to cut things with it day to day for work. We don't know, and it's not our place to tell somebody that we do. Okay, now, even if we could say that you could connote intent from possession, then the gun grabbers would be in a bad position as well. Because as we've seen, the Centers for Disease Control actually did a study, which they hid, by the way, that showed that American civilians use guns 3.6 times more often to stop crimes than to engage in crimes. So in fact, if they thought that possession connoted intent and they wanted to get the government to force people to do things, then they would want the government to force people to own more firearms. Hello, Switzerland. Okay? Now, finally, ask them this question. If they are in favor of politicians passing statutes that will punish people for owning, buying, possessing, trading, anything like that, guns or ammunition, then who will actually execute those laws and enforce them? That's right, armed agents of the state.
With 350 million guns in 65 million places, households, from Key West to Alaska. 350 million objects in 65 million places. If the federal government wanted to confiscate those objects, how would they do that?
Officials in the Chicago suburb of Deerfield have banned the possession, sale, and manufacture of assault-style weapons and large-capacity magazines. Residents have until June 13th to give them up, and if they refuse, they will face fines of up to $1,000 per day. So, when you come right down to it, the people who support so-called gun control laws to stop gun violence on the streets are actually supportive of threats of gun violence against innocent, law-abiding people.
And the president's talking about confiscating guns like they did in Australia. Well, that's never going to happen here. Why? Because we have a Second Amendment, and also you talk about a national registry. I mean, do we really trust the federal government to know where all the guns are, the same federal government that runs the IRS?
There's no two ways around it. And finally, I'd like to mention something about conservatives and a deceased hero from the Supreme Court for conservatives. In 2007, Justice Antonin Scalia wrote the majority decision for a Supreme Court case called District of Columbia v. Heller. His name was Richard Heller. I met Dick Heller, and I've spoken to him about this case. And it was about whether or not the right to keep and bear arms was a group right, as the leftist collectivists always tell us, or it was an individual right. Well, Justice Scalia, to his credit, spent over 60 pages explaining through contemporaneous accounts that the Founding Fathers believed it was an individual right.
Undoubtedly, some think that the Second Amendment is outmoded in a society where our standing army is the pride of our nation, where well-trained police forces provide personal security, and where gun violence is a serious problem. That is perhaps debatable, but what is not debatable is that it is not the role of this court to pronounce the Second Amendment extinct.
Okay, to his credit, great job. But he didn't really need to do that. As I mentioned before, he could have just used logic to say that group is just a word applied to an assemblage of individuals who always retain their individual natural rights. It's always reducible to the individual. That's all. Groups can't have rights because they're just composed of individuals. Unfortunately, he didn't do that, and he went a little bit further. See, at the end of the Heller decision, Justice Scalia said this.
Like most rights, the Second Amendment right is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever, in any manner whatsoever, and for whatever purpose.
And that is absolutely wrong. Unfortunately, after spending all that time defending the individual right to keep and bear arms, Justice Scalia not only undercut the individual right to keep and bear arms, saying that, well, yeah, it's a right, but everybody knows rights can be attenuated. Wrong, wrong, wrong. He actually undercut the very concept of rights itself. And now it's being revealed because the courts themselves are starting to use that conclusion to the Heller case as an excuse to further attenuate the right to keep and bear arms. It's very sad. It's a sad legacy for the close of Justice Scalia's career. But it's something that we have to remember. Even people that are generally seen as heroes for the Constitution can do things that can be very dangerous to our rights. And perhaps it's a lesson for us to learn that we can never trust agents of the state, any of them. The government itself is always a threat to our rights. Just something to remember. Thank you so much for watching this series. And don't forget, feel free to like, comment, anything you like, because we always love to get feedback here. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.